Good evening, my name is Jacob Aronovitz, and today I'll be talking about my chosen health problem, chlamydia, and discussing an article. In this presentation, I'll cover the background of chlamydia, the study objective of said article, the methodology, data collection, the results, conclusions, and limitations of the study. To begin, I'll go over the general background of chlamydia by answering the following questions. Chlamydia is a sexually transmitted bacterial infection which is typically spread through oral, anal, or vaginal sex when infected genital fluids enter another person's body. It was first identified in the 1970s, however, it's probably been around way before that. It's just there wasn't any test to identify the STI. It became prevalent in the late 1980s when there was a spike in cases. It affects humans and mostly through the pelvic PID or pelvic inflammatory disease, and this can cause infertility, ectopic pregnancies, and pelvic abdominal pain. It does so by scarring the fallopian tubes and damaging them. It also leads to increased likelihood of contracting other STIs because it weakens your immune system. That means a person who has chlamydia is more likely to come down with another STI. This is an important health issue because most cases of chlamydia are asymptomatic, with 75% of cases in women being asymptomatic. This means that it's very easy for the disease to spread without being noticed and people not getting tested for it. On top of this, it's the most commonly and frequently reported bacterial STI, with around 131 million new cases each year. Now, chlamydia does disproportionately affect a certain demographic, with most sexually active young adults bearing the burden of chlamydia. This means that areas with a young sexually active population, such as college towns and urban cities, have an unfair burden to bear. The GIS-based case study that I selected is the spatiotemporal analysis of 11 years of chlamydia trachomatis data from southern China. This was reported on in the Lancet Regional Health in Western Pacific, and the authors are listed below. This study looked into an area of southern China and explored how certain factors affected a person's likelihood of contracting chlamydia. Two factors of particular interest were the sex ratios of counties and the urbanicity by county. Sex ratios falls into the population vertex because it looks at gender. Urbanicity falls into the habitat vertex because it looks at the built environment that humans created and how it affects them. The study design chosen for this particular case was a retrospective cohort study, which first identifies if a person was exposed/not exposed to a certain factor, with the two factors being listed earlier, urbanicity and sex ratios, and then seeing if they develop a disease, which in this case was chlamydia. And now a confirmed case of chlamydia were those who, regardless of symptoms, had at least one laboratory confirmed test result, whether by means of microscopy, culture, antigen testing, or by nucleic amplification. This would count as a positive test result. Moving on, the area of interest was the Guangdong province, which is home to the Pearl River Delta region. This area was an excellent region to test whether or not chlamydia rates was affected by the listed below factors, because the Pearl River Delta region is extremely urban and has a greater male to female sex ratio than the surrounding area, which is rural and has about an equal ratio. So the data on chlamydia rates was collected over 11 years from 2006 to 2016, in which the confirmed cases of chlamydia were logged in a web base, and the characteristics of said cases can be seen on the right in the table 1, where age was recorded, the reporting clinic, gender, occupations, rurality, and if they traveled outside of their home. In these 11 years, 419,627 reported cases of confirmed chlamydia were recorded. Now, looking at the factors to determine whether or not someone was exposed or not, for sex ratio, they took information from the census. An exposed individual was an individual living in a county with a ratio of men greater than women, while a person wasn't exposed if they lived in the county where the ratio was equal to 1 or there were more females than males. A person was exposed to urbanicity if an individual lived in a land categorized as cultivated, managed, or urbanized. This definition was given by the Global Land Cover 2000 project, which classified areas of the Guangdong province as either urbanized or rural, and the not exposed people lived in the remainder land. The previous information, reported incidences of chlamydia, urbanicity, and male-to-female sex ratio were all graphed below. And as you can see, the Pearl River Delta region, which is located centrally in the Guangdong province, has higher urbanicity and higher male-to-female sex ratio, while the eastern and western parts of the Guangdong province have lower urbanicity and a lower female-to-male sex ratio. In order to graph the previous maps and other maps, the study used ArcGIS and the Getty's-Ord GI statistical method, which identified hot and cold spots. Hot spots were places where case count was significantly greater than that generated in random models, and cold spots were where case counts were significantly lower than generated models. They also used a SAT scan, which used discrete Poisson models, which identified clusters based on space and time. And finally, to identify whether there was a relationship between factors and cases, the quasi-Poisson regression models were utilized to determine what factors had an effect on area-level outcomes. 3 factors were identified to have an effect on chlamydia rates. A protective factor was GDP growth in 2015. A person was 23% less likely to contract chlamydia during this time. Now, 2 risk factors included a greater male to female sex ratio and a greater degree of urbanicity. A person was 3.64 more times likely to contract chlamydia if they lived in a county where there was a greater male to female sex ratio, and a person who lived in a place that was urban was 2.44 more times likely to contract chlamydia than those who lived in rural areas. And this is pictured in the table to the right. Using the Getty's-Ord GI statistical method, the following maps were made in ArcGIS and depict areas where either a person has a much higher risk of contracting chlamydia or a much lower risk of contracting chlamydia. The red/orange areas are areas where a person is more likely to contract chlamydia, and the blue areas are areas where a person is less likely to contract chlamydia. For the higher risk areas, there were 25 counties and 4 clusters with statistically significant z-scores indicating a person is significantly more likely to contract chlamydia. And the relative chlamydia rates were 2.02 and 2.39 times that of the rest of the province. For the areas where a person was statistically less likely to contract chlamydia, there were 11 counties and 2 clusters, and the relative chlamydia rates were 0.17 and 0.18 times that of other clusters. In conclusion, a person was much less likely to contract chlamydia if they lived in the eastern and western areas of the Guangdong province because it was more rural and had a lower male to female sex ratio, and people were much more likely to contract chlamydia if they lived in the Pearl River Delta region, which was known for its urbanicity and its high male to female sex ratio. There are some limitations to the study. For instance, only people that were symptomatic went in and got tested. This means there could have been an underreporting of cases. In addition to this, the Guangdong province is very closely located to Hong Kong. This study only took account into factors which occurred in the province. It didn't take into account factors like the economic role that Hong Kong plays on this province. Lastly, there was a issue with reliability of diagnostic tests. The ICT test can be as low as 30% accurate with lower concentrations of chlamydia. The following reference has the cited article which I used for the study.